Hi everyone, this is Stephanie, and today I'm going to show you how to make a quilted oven mitt, and this is a free pattern from Charm Patterns. I have linked below in the description where you can find the written instructions as well as the pattern that you can download from Charm Patterns. So let's start by going over the supplies that you'll need for this pattern. I've printed out my oven mitt pattern and I have cut it out. For your fabric, you want to make sure you're using 100% cotton or linen fabric. I'm using a cotton linen blend canvas fabric for my exterior, and I've just cut that half yard of fabric in half, so I'm dealing with a piece that is 18 inches long by 21 inches wide. I have the same size piece in quilting cotton for my lining, and then again I have about an 18 by 21 inch piece of Insulbright insulated batting, and then 2 pieces of cotton batting that are that size as well. You'll also need some basic sewing tools like your fabric shears, some either safety pins or quilting clips like these. Optionally, you can also have a walking foot, which is really useful for quilting, just keeping all the layers moving together. It's not necessary, but it does make it a little easier. And then I have some thread to match my lining and the outside, and then something to mark your fabric with, so you can use chalk or water-soluble pen, and then a ruler. I'm going to start by taking just my exterior fabric and my ruler and drawing some diagonal lines across the fabric, and these lines are going to be about 1 inch apart. I'm just going to have diagonal lines going in one direction. If you wanted them to go in crisscrossing directions, you could do that as well. You can really choose whatever quilting pattern you want for this design. Now I'm going to make my quilt stack, so I'll take my 2 layers of cotton batting and place them down on my mat and just try to get out any creases or lumps, and then take your Insulbright or your insulated batting and lay it so that it is shiny side facing up on top. So this has a matte side facing down and a shiny side up. Last, take your exterior fabric and lay it so that it's right side facing up at the top of the stack. Once you have everything nicely lined up, you want to put either safety pins or quilting clips all the way around the stack to hold everything together. Now I'm going to attach my walking foot, and the way this works with my machine is I just unscrew right up here, and I am removing the whole presser foot and the shank that holds it on, and I'll set that aside. Then the walking foot will also screw into place. I'll tighten it with this little screwdriver, and at the back there's a little piece that kind of snaps in. I'm switching out my sewing machine needle for a heavy-duty size 90/14 quilting needle. This should work well for quilting on canvas. You're definitely going to want to have a quilting needle because they have a little bit more strength in the shaft, so they're less likely to break when you're going through so many layers of fabric. Now I'm going to start quilting, so I've set my stitch length to about 3 millimeters, so a little bit longer than normal, and I'm just going to pull out my clip and place this really thick stack underneath my presser foot. It can be a little bit hard to get it under there at first. I'd like to start not at the very edge, but maybe ½ an inch in, so that my presser foot is completely on the stack of fabric and it's not wedged. If you start with your presser foot wedged, it has a hard time getting started stitching. So you don't need to stitch all the way to the very edge of this because we are going to be cutting everything out of it anyway. I'm starting at one of the corners and I'm going to quilt all the way across on that line that I drew, and then I'll just keep stitching parallel lines in the same direction. You don't want to turn your fabric and start stitching in the opposite direction, or you could get some kind of puckers and areas where the fabric looks like it's pulling in opposite directions. So try to just keep stitching all parallel lines in the same way. Also, you may have noticed I'm not backstitching at the beginning or end of any of these rows. You don't need to do it. We're going to be cutting out our oven mitt from this fabric once it's quilted anyway, so it's just not necessary. So I've already gone ahead and cut out one side of the oven mitt using this pattern piece, and make sure when you cut out the other side that you flip over your pattern piece so that you are cutting a piece that is the mirror image of the other one, so that these will be able to fit together. And I'm just using pattern weights. You could use pins, but it will probably just go through the top layer of fabric because this is so thick. So there we have two mirrored pieces, and next we want to transfer this pivot point mark. So go ahead and grab an awl or a pen and poke a little hole right where that pivot point is, and then grab your marker, and you're just going to transfer that mark right there where that hole is. Then I also draw in my stitching line. So I draw a slightly curved line around the thumb and then a slightly straighter line going here up towards the top of the fingers. So that'll give me a good guideline to stitch on. Now take your quilting clips and pin all the way around your mitt except at the bottom opening. Now we'll take this over to the sewing machine and stitch it with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. To help with stitching through so many layers, I start by stitching on a little scrap piece and then slide my oven mitt underneath my presser foot. Then I stitch a few stitches, back stitch, and then keep going all the way around the outside of the mitt at 5/8 of an inch. You might want to double check that you did remember to put your presser foot down before you start stitching. When you are stitching with something so thick, sometimes it's hard to tell whether the presser foot is up or down. So just double check that, especially if you notice that your fabric isn't really moving. As you sew around the curved areas at the top of the mitt, you'll probably need to stop occasionally with your needle down in the fabric, lift up your presser foot, and pivot your mitt slightly so that you can turn and keep stitching that curve. As you approach that pivot point, slow down so you can stop with your needle right at that pivot point. Then lift up your presser foot and turn your fabric so you can start stitching in the other direction. Now, around where we just stitched, trim your seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch. Clip to but not through your pivot point. You'll especially want to trim down some of the bulk in between the thumb and the hand. Now turn your mitt right side out. You can use a blunt instrument like a knitting needle, a chopstick, or a point turner to help you turn out all of the areas like the thumb. Now take your lining and fold it in half so that we can cut out 2 pieces at once. Transfer that pivot point mark to the wrong side of the fabric just like we did before. Again, I'm going to draw in some guidelines to use for my stitching line. You also want to mark an area about 4 inches wide on the side that doesn't have the thumb. And this is what we're going to leave unstitched when we stitch the lining together. Later we'll have to use this gap to turn the whole oven mitt right side out. Go ahead and pin all the way around your mitt. Now stitch all the way around your oven mitt with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to do this just like we did before, pivoting at that pivot point mark. But this time, I'm going to stop when I get to that mark that I made along this edge here. And I'm going to do a little bit of back stitching. Then I'm going to skip that 4-inch gap, start at my next mark, and stitch all the way to the edge and back stitch. Now trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch, avoiding trimming the seam allowance at the opening and at that gap that we've left in the side. Then you're going to notch your curves and clip to but not through the pivot point. Make sure not to cut through your stitching. Then if you have any excess fabric, go ahead and trim away that between the thumb and the finger area. Now for my hanging loop, I'm just cutting out a rectangle from my lining that is 2.5 inches by 5 inches. And I'm going to take this over to the ironing board and we're going to fold it in half lengthwise so that it is wrong sides together, right sides facing out. And press, then unfold and take one of the long edges and fold it in towards that crease. Then do the same with the other long edge, fold it in towards that center crease. Then you're going to refold along the center crease and press one more time. Then go ahead and edge stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge along both long edges. So now we have everything ready to assemble. Your outer piece is right side out, your lining is still inside out, and your loop is here. Put your hand inside the exterior piece, and then place the exterior piece inside your lining just like this, matching up the thumb area. Also make sure the bottom edges are nicely aligned and your side seams are aligned with each other. Take your loop and fold it in half like this, then sandwich it in between the lining and the exterior. You want to have it near the side seam that doesn't have the thumb. You can put it right on the side seam, or if you're worried about the bulk, just have it a little bit offset. Clip all the way around the opening, just like this. I try to press open my seam allowances on the side seams as much as possible to make it a little bit easier to sew over. Stitch all the way around that bottom opening at 5/8 of an inch. It can be a little bit tricky stitching something with such a small circumference, so I try to just hold this top edge up and out of the way, and I just keep the area I'm about to stitch on straight, just the, maybe 2 inches right in front, and then the rest I try to pull out of the way. Reach into the gap in the lining and pull your oven mitt out of the hole. You should end up with something that looks like this. Now we just need to close up that gap in the lining, so I'm going to pin it closed, and then I will edge stitch close to this edge. Now I've just put my lining to the inside of the mitt, and I'm going to pin along the opening so that the lining is rolled slightly to the inside. If your lining and your exterior are a different color, you're going to want to switch out your bobbin thread to match the outside of your mitt, and your top thread will match your lining color. So I have this black thread in my bobbin for the outside, and I have green thread going through my machine at the top. And I'm going to start top stitching this opening, so you could stitch at about anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch, whatever you think looks nice. So I'm going here at about 3/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to stitch all the way around the opening, making sure to pull out my pins before I stitch over them. And that's the last step, so I'm all done with this oven mitt. I hope you were able to follow along this tutorial and make your own. Happy sewing!